I recently received a comment from a guy who said he was finally being honest with himself about major aspects of his life that he had been unhappy with. He used to rationalize and tell himself it wasn't so bad, but he stayed miserable. He was pleased he'd finally decided to make changes that he knew he needed to make. And I think this comment is just the tip of the iceberg. Many men, especially as we get more established in our lives and get older, are likely to feel like at least some parts of our lives don't fit who we are. Maybe they never did, maybe they used to, but we've outgrown them. And I'm not talking about things not being perfect either. I'm talking about a gnawing sense of unease or even dread that we know is there, but we don't want to face. A feeling that some aspects of our lives always feel like we're walking uphill carrying a heavy load. We can get so used to living this way that we start to convince ourselves that everything in life is supposed to be hard. Maybe we've been in a career that we chose as young men, and decades later, we hit a wall and just can't keep muscling through it any longer. Maybe it used to be a good fit, or maybe it never was, but at this point, all that matters is that we need a change. Or a lot of us struggle with our marriage or relationship. Maybe we married the wrong person or have grown apart to the point that our house doesn't feel like a home. We're not alone, but we might feel lonely as hell. The relationship is cold and empty, or maybe harsh and critical. Maybe we're with a controlling person who thinks they're the boss of us instead of treating us like grown men. Or maybe the dissatisfaction isn't with a career or relationship, it's with something else entirely. Maybe your whole life is overscheduled and it feels out of control. Or you live in a chaotic house where there's little peace and you are the default problem solver for everyone else. Whatever it is though, there are many reasons why it's easier to keep lying to ourselves about it. We want to believe our life is good enough. We want to believe that what we built matters and that the choices we made were right, that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And we don't want to admit it, but we're probably afraid at some level. Afraid that wanting more makes us selfish. Afraid that admitting something's wrong means that we failed. Afraid that if we're honest about our dissatisfaction, we'll have to do something about it. And we don't know what that something is, or if we even have it in us to follow through. So we get really good at talking ourselves out of what we feel. We focus on what we should feel instead of what we actually feel. And there are several ways we gaslight ourselves. We've gotten so good at it that most of the time we don't even realize we're doing it. For example, we practice false gratitude. We say, well, I should be happy. Other people have it worse. We use comparison as a way to dismiss our own experience. But just because someone else has a harder life doesn't mean ours is working. Being aware of what we have is important, but gratitude should never become a weapon we use against ourselves. It should never become the reason we ignore what's true. We also fall into the sunk cost fallacy. We think, I've spent 20 years in this field, I can't start over now. We stay because of what we've already invested, not because it's actually right for us anymore. We over-rationalize. We tell ourselves, well, it makes sense on paper, so I must be overreacting. It must not be that bad. We trust the logic more than the feeling. But sometimes the feeling is the truth, and the logic is just the story we're telling ourselves to avoid facing it. Now, your situation might be perfect for someone else, but that doesn't mean it makes sense for you. We get too attached to our identities. If I don't do this, who even am I? We build our entire sense of self around a role or a path or a person, and the idea of stepping away feels like we're disappearing entirely. We deploy martyr logic. Well, it's not about me. I'm doing this for my family. Remember Breaking Bad? That's exactly what Walter White always told himself about the new evil life he was living. It was always for the family. And with this logic, we frame self-abandonment as sacrifice, as if taking care of ourselves somehow betrays the people we love. And we maintain loyalty to old promises to a fault. We say, well, I made this choice, I have to stick with it no matter what. We treat past decisions like contracts we're never allowed to renegotiate, even when the terms no longer fit who we become. And if we're talking about marriage, just to be clear, I don't believe in using divorce as the easy button. But seriously, any real relationship that's going to last takes two to keep it going. It's not supposed to be a sentence to a life of misery with a person who has no interest in doing their part to make the relationship better. All of these are ways we avoid the truth. And here's why this can be so hard to face. Most of us have been trained to suppress discomfort and push through. It's the Gen X way, right? To not complain, to be grateful for what we have, to keep our heads down and do what needs to be done. Admitting we're unhappy pushes most of us far out of our comfort zones. It feels like failure. It feels like we're being difficult or weak or ungrateful. And maybe there's also some shame mixed in there. Shame that we let this happen, that we made poor decisions, that we didn't see it sooner, that we've wasted years in situations that weren't right for us. So we try to turn off our emotions and stay functional. We keep going. We're some sort of robots. We tell ourselves we're fine. And sometimes in a practical sense, we might be to some degree. We're managing, we're getting by, the bills are getting paid, the responsibilities get handled. But underneath that functionality, something's eroding. The cost of denying what's true doesn't go away just because we ignore it. It shows up as bitterness, as burnout, as resentment toward the people around us. It causes our stress hormones to stay elevated and can have serious health impacts. It's really a quiet internal collapse where we're still performing our life but not actually living it anymore. We're just going through the motions, waiting for something to change, while refusing to admit that we're the ones who need to change it. Nobody is going to do it for us. And at some point, we have to ask ourselves, is this really what I want? Or is this just what we've convinced ourselves we're supposed to want? The first step isn't action. It's not figuring out what to do next. It's not making a plan or having a vision or knowing where we're headed. Sometimes we don't know any of those exactly. The first step is just being honest with ourselves, telling ourselves the truth, even if it's uncomfortable, even if we don't know what to do with it yet. And that might sound like finally saying to ourselves, this isn't working anymore, or I've outgrown this, or I feel numb and I don't know why, but I know something's wrong. The goal here isn't to have all the answers. The goal is to stop lying to ourselves about the questions. Once we stop trying to convince ourselves that everything's fine, if we really want to get more clarity, the best thing we can do is to create some space for ourselves to hear it. This is where a lot of us want some kind of system or process, some step-by-step guide for figuring out what we really want. But that's not how this really works. There's no formula. What we need isn't complicated. We just need to stop drowning out our own voice. And this is more about tapping into the creative right brain, and you can't do that by brute force. What helps us is to avoid the usual ways that we might distract ourselves and then just be with whatever comes to us. So for some of us, that might mean taking walks or going for runs where we're not listening to music or podcasts or solving problems in our heads. For others, it's sitting outside in nature, or driving without the radio on, or going fishing, or just creating some regular space where we're not performing, not producing, not consuming content, not figuring anything out. We're just letting ourselves be. That's when we hear our own inner voice. The specifics don't matter as much as the intention. We're creating conditions where we can actually hear ourselves think, and that's something we rarely do in the modern world, where we can hear what's underneath all the shoulds and obligations and old stories we keep telling ourselves. Here's what most of us will realize once we get to that point. We probably already know what's true. We're not missing some critical piece of information. We're not confused. We're not crazy. We've just spent years, maybe decades, talking ourselves out of what we feel, convincing ourselves our needs don't matter as much as keeping everything stable, prioritizing everyone else's comfort over our own honesty. One thing that really helped me when I was figuring these things out in my own life was that I learned that I needed to trust myself. I had to separate out my inner voice that always seemed to know best if I listened to it from my inner gaslighting logic that I would often use to try to silence it. And what I really wish I could convince you to believe is that wanting a different life doesn't make us selfish. It doesn't mean we're ungrateful or weak. We men need to realize that having needs isn't the same thing as being needy. Wanting more alignment with who we actually are isn't asking too much. It's just being honest. And that honesty, as uncomfortable as it is one of the most important things we can offer ourselves. And being truly ourselves is the only way we can show up honestly for the ones we care about. We can be grateful for what we have and still want something to change. Both of those things can be true at the same time. The life that fits us might not be the one we're currently living. And admitting that, honestly, without guilt, isn't betrayal. It's really integrity. It's being true to yourself. If something feels off, trust that. Most of us have spent too long dismissing that feeling, explaining it away, convincing ourselves it's really not that bad. But that signal is there for a reason. And the first step toward living a life that actually fits us is admitting honestly that the one we're in might not. And as always, I don't know your personal situation, and I'm not saying you need to change anything. But I hope you'll learn to trust yourself, speak your truth, and feel that you deserve to be part of the equation too, whatever that means for you in your own life situation. Let me know if you struggle with being honest with yourself. Please support the channel by liking the video if it was helpful, and consider subscribing if you're a guy wanting to live a more authentic and rewarding second chapter. Thanks for watching. I appreciate your time. I hope you have a great day.